I also be a way and every year and a multi-me Kwame Yeboah and a motiminka and every year in a Assam broadcasting so and a Masugusua with ye. I also be a way and a dream and a cosi August at the mo. Na enyano Assam broadcast a fapping never cool. A pipima a hons and some and a edging. Yenim say events a Seneca Macra and so. Omokunwia omosan to mwa se edidi ebom ema ne yie e se de bibima ndi mu acheche ene ade nyina na still ya bibima ene edo ye ho ye kokora na ye san etena se edidi edibom ema ne yie enti asan ye fapem enyina no se ne yie mu ne papa mu ye ba be ka ho asem na ya pe ho adesua bi na ye nyina ye sua se de be ya mistakes bi a ye make ye no ye make the same mistakes bi na afi ebe progress ede akọ yenimu enyanom enne enkoma minimum bedie no ade a was obia Ghana ni bia pay attention na ode tie sa ne bani yie efise ewiase angasa no world media any world news no omo ankasa wo mo information na omo pese omo de manyen many a times no aya enema omo prepare some be say omo de manyen na etimi eme ya adwene no eda anase twe adwene koto be foforo na omo ankasa afi omo se kire esa ye enema boni ede ewo kire akwese obi huhu a na obi keka sa pepepe obi huhu a na obi keka nti abrafo no ye free be problem and solution and no say that kuma ba beka ho asem problem ono koso problem na no ankasa atwen say de be ya ube catch some solution no ankasa side asam solution nti answer no create problem na only solution dada nti ewiase inipa na imu acheche bebrebe ebi wo ho no mu a omo think 100 steps ahead 100 steps ahead into mutifa ko na o dwene na mo ko e social media bebrebe no na omo so dwene 100 steps ahead enti enne enkomo a ewo ankasa no eye ye friend say economic hitman me yin video no e dey akire musisi economic hitman papa bi a ono no oye adwuma ma abrofo no a ono na ne de ne say okogro so ekosai enkro no economy okokripo ekro no economy say de be ya America ebetimi atagine yie enti no sa no omoba etu dafa sika dafa se opese wono ma okro ni yie da bi o ma okro no enye yie entu de gisika na wonko a wono obusuafo nye den enkonkodi na omo so enya ho emra na omo melutu omo niema efensa mo niema ede ewo nti sa economic hitman oba obetana table so na etu ni ngwa ne nsemu but wo hwe ne kasemu a ena obi anso sura abrofo no because omo za abrofo no America for no more powers any ade into your government na atakonya so na nipa bi say aba betena wanim no waka cho so okay fine bra beje bisia so mpo bra ne beje bisia na bisia na bra beje no ade sei ena fafsa bisia ne de eye na esa wo kwa na obo bisia no o no untimi fa bisia ne nye de wo pese odi you but ono no yo ono pese odi bisia ne ye no ena odi be man nti eno no asade tu ato nchen se se de ono ka cho se ye no wanya na afidie odi tu na be de abebo edi ntia efise opekwan bi a wo no kuro no obe dismantle sa wo kuro no obe pekwan bi so no adika eno ntina Ghana de bi Africa de bi na edika no obe dika na ono afa ho aba betwetwe oyo ne wo niema ede ko na de neka because e ka no kwa be fa so abetua no eno no entini de ne say o ma wo no en succeed o twu niema nyina because o ma succeed a oba be powerful entini de ne say obeso disu nti ene ade a ye wo so oye ma no onye ma ono be chini nyina so ati ase na nti o di to na to nchen say we ni pesa wo ye busianse ni pesa wo je si ni pesa wo de ye nti o de sa ade ne ye sa ade a ne fine eno ye cool ma wanya sa ade ne tu nti wo hwe a edibia leaders bebebe se Gaddafi se edibia ya no omo se Gaddafi e friend say ene me bi ho no ma currency ne niema ene kwa se mi nkomo sesie onya Gaddafi anye nti ene cool no ene che wo sa de media ebe ma Gaddafi luku se Gaddafi de oye ne paponi ne number 1 ene de ifa ho sa de cool no because na niema bi ho be so Gaddafi ye ene Gaddafi ntimi anye na emwa wo mo ɛna ɛde kum wɔn nti deɛ meka ne sɛ yɛma yɛni nna hɔ yɛne yɛnnua panyin no ɛnante a yɛma yɛni nna hɔ because nyɛ biribiara a ɔbɛyɛ biara na wɔsɛ yɛde yɛfa soɔ ɛfiri sɛ ɔde adeɛ koraa brɛ sɛ sua ɛnyɛ nokorɛ mu because ɔde biribi ɛbata ho sɛ de bɛyɛ ɔnhu nokorɛ no ankasa saa ɛna ɔte sɛ de bi wobɛtumi adi wiase so enti ɛkwame hitman yɛka sɛ hitman a hitman yɛ obi wɔ no mu ase yɛabɔ ne paa sɛ ɔnkɔ baabi ɛnkɔ na ɔnkɔdi awu ɔnkɔ na ɔnkɔdi awu na hitman ɔno no yɛtwɛ no yɛabɔ ne pɛi nti na ɔkɔ no akɔdi awu na ɔba no de results aba sɛ wɔwɔ awudie no a meyɛ fɛ mede kɔɛ no wode maa me no adwuma no makɔdi aba na wakɔgye ne sika wɔkɔ ɔnkɔdi awu enti wei mu deɛ ɛnyɛ nipa awudie wei mu no economic awudie ɛkyerɛ sɛ nneɛma a ɛbɛtumi ama wo kuro no agyinagyina sɛ fa sɛ kɔɔbɔ ɔbɛsia koraa no a ɛbɛsia bɛtumi ama wo kuro no agyinagyina no ɔbɔ wo in such a way sɛ wo kuro no ɛntumi nyɛ dɛ ɛntumi ɛnyina sɔɔte aseɛ na wo kuro no ayɛ basaa na ɔno watumi ayɛ dɛ ɛde wo so no wanya deɛ ɔpɛ na ɛyɛ nipa de sɛni ɛna ɛtumi dwene saa nneɛ no ɛyɛ sɛ ne nua ho bɛkyerɛ no na ɔno wobɛtumi agɛn ne ɛti deɛ mepɛ sɛ mekyerɛ sɛ yɛnua panyini no a ɔyɛ buroni no ne nanteɛ no ebi no na ɛdɔɔso koraa a ɛwɔ sɛ yɛn Ghana ma nyinaa no yɛn tumi yɛ dɛ ɛda hɔ na yɛnhu dewe a na akwan ebi esiteɛ ɛne ahokyerɛ yɛwɔ mu yes yɛ leaders no obi wɔ hɔ no mu a ɔmo ntumi nyɛ nneɛma deɛ but many a times no ɔho so wobɛkɔ na nyɛ ɔmo foto na obi de to bi ato nkyɛn aka akyerɛ sɛ masa ntumi nyɛ sei anaasɛ nhyehyɛ bi wɔ hɔ no mu a obi ntumi nyɛ sei wobɛkɔ na ebi yɛ bibi saa sɛ ɔte aseɛ akyerɛ sɛ ebi mu nso so wɔn te sɛ wɔn no nso so ate agyina a wɔn anyɛ a yɛku wɔn mu nti wɔn nso bɛtena wɔn anim na wɔka kyerɛ wɔn sɛ masa yɛsɛ a wɔahwɛ abɛyɛ because wɔn bɛ so bɛku sɔɔte ase ɛno nti na ama yɛ leaders no mmarima adane mmaa yi a yɛfɛ ne sɛ amanfoɔ aborɔfo baa na wɔn abɛdaadaa wɔn na wɔabu afɛ so a yɛ kuro no ato apansami nti saa nneɛma no bi na wɔn sɛ ani da hɔ na afei sometimes no yɛde attention ɛkɔ yɛtamfo no ankasa so a ɔmpɛ sɛ yɛkuro no bɛyɛ de ebi yie na yɛnyie ne mfiri aban no so kakraa bi na afei yɛmfa saa questions wei ɛmmɔ aban no sɛ ɛyɛ nokorɛ sɛ biribi sɛ asi enti na wɔn ntumi nyɛ nneɛma a ɛwɔ so wɔyɛ no anaa mema mekasa ɛnwɔ bebree asan broadcast na butie no I am subscribe to your YouTube channel information bi say na wobɛnya ade atie na nyɛ we program we nko a your world gossip nso so wɔ no mu a ɛno nso nsɛm wei sisi wɔ abrokyire ne nsɛm sisi wɔ Ghana no nso so yɛka bi ɛno nso so mefa akɔnya yi so akyea little she ɔne na program no ɔda no a yɛfrɛ no sɛ ɔne lady sledge medam ase sɛ moayɛ yi mo subscribe ɛmfama me na monkɔ na monkɔ tie na monhu papa no yɛfrɛ no sɛ num asɛm na ɔkasa wie a mɛba na mede a few ayi bi ɛnso so ɛde abɛtoa so.
Please welcome to the stage, John Perkins.
Thank you. I stood in front of the Shah of Iran, the presidents of Indonesia, Ecuador, Panama, members of the Royal House of Saudi Arabia, and I've said something like, in this hand, I have millions of dollars for you and your friends if you play our game. In this hand, I have a gun in case you decide not to. Now, my words were more diplomatic than that, but that was the message. I was an economic hitman. And we economic hitmen have created a new global economy, really, a form of capitalism that I call predatory capitalism. It isn't working. We all know this. The oceans are rising. The glaciers are melting. Less than 5% of us live here in the United States, and we consume almost 30% of the world's resources, while half the world is on the verge of starvation, or actually starving. That's not a model. China can't do it. India can't do it. They're trying, but they can't do it. We have to change. We have to have a revolution. We must change the system. I'll get into that in a minute, but first, how did I become an economic hitman? While I was still in business school, I was interviewed by the National Security Agency, the NSA. They put me through a series of extensive psychological tests, including on a lie detector. It's a long story, but to make a long story short, I ended up going in the Peace Corps and being sent deep into the Amazon rainforest. Now, I'd grown up the son of a teacher in a boys' prep school for very wealthy boys in rural New Hampshire. I grew up with lots of snow and cold, kind of like here in the winter, you know? And suddenly I find myself living in a thatched roof hut in the steamy jungle. I think I adjusted easily to that. After the Peace Corps, I then took a job. I was given a job as an economist at an international consulting firm in Boston with close ties to the NSA and the CIA. I was trained by a woman named Claudine Martin, whose job it was to train me to be an economic hitman. Now, Claudine had seen my NSA files. She knew that I wanted three things that I thought all my prep school buddies, the rich kids, had had: money, power, and sex. Claudine was really good at her job. And she promised me the first two: money and power. And she taught me quite a bit about the third. And then she told me what my job would entail. I would go to countries with resources our corporations covet, like oil. I'd arrange a huge loan to those countries from the World Bank or its sister organizations, but the money wouldn't actually go to the country. It would go to our corporations, Bechtel, Halliburton, Brown and Root, familiar names, to build big infrastructure projects in those countries and incidentally make huge profits in the process. They'd build power plants and industrial parks, things that would benefit a few wealthy families in the country, the ones that own the industries. But the majority of the people would suffer. They would be left holding a huge debt they couldn't repay. So we'd go back and say, since you can't pay your debt, sell your resource, oil or whatever, real cheap to our corporations. Privatize. Sell your utilities, your schools, your jails, everything like that to our corporations. And Claudine also told me that if the leaders of these countries refused my offer, people she called jackals would be right behind me. I didn't actually carry a gun, but the jackals did. My first assignment was in Indonesia, a country that had just ended a terrible civil war where more than 1 million people had been killed. It had a terrifying reputation. And I have to admit that when I arrived in Jakarta, knowing I'd be there for about 3 years, my knees were shaking pretty bad. My stomach was filled with fluttering butterflies. I had no idea what I was supposed to do. I was a very young man. I just knew that I was expected to produce a report that would convince the Indonesian government to build an extremely expensive electrical system, hiring our corporations to do it. Claudine had made it sound simple, even kind of James Bondishly romantic. But now I'm struck by reality, and I felt naive, ill-prepared, vulnerable. Fortunately for me, the winner of the Civil War, President Suharto, who was actually a dictator, wanted the projects that I was offering. And he also wanted CIA and Pentagon protection. And so every time I stumbled, and I stumbled often, somebody was there to pick me up. A government official would appear with an incredible report that would indicate beyond any shadow of a doubt that electricity was all the country needed to take off to huge growth. A Harvard-trained mathematician showed up with a mathematical formula that proved that if they just built this electrical system, everything would be fine. In the end, I produced a report that forecasts the need for electricity at an unheard of annual rate of 19%. Indonesia got its loan. Our corporations made lots of money, and I was promoted from economist to chief economist. It was quite a lesson. At that time, the Cold War was just really, really revving up. And Washington believed that Cuba was about to spread communism throughout the hemisphere. The CIA developed a program called Operation Condor to support right-wing dictatorships in Brazil, Argentina, Chile, throughout the continent. Jaime Roldos, president of Ecuador, democratically elected, and Omar Torrijos, head of state of Panama, strongly opposed Operation Condor. I was sent down to get them to change their ways. They wouldn't. They refused. Roldos was killed when his private plane crashed in what many believe was not an accident. Torrijos said, if CIA killed my friend Jaime, I'll probably be next. In less than 3 months, he died when his private plane crashed under very similar circumstances. You're going to hear after the break, from a Marine Corps general who was in Panama at the time, and he agrees with me that these were probably, at least Torrijos was probably assassination. We don't really know who caused it. And I want to say that I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't believe in some overarching conspiracy to take over the world. But I do read reports. I think I'm a conspiracy factualist. You know, I read just recently declassified information, the CIA's own website, where they admit that the US government was deeply involved in the overthrow or assassination of Prime Minister Mossadegh of Iran, President Allende of Chile, Arbenz of Guatemala, Diem of Vietnam, Lumumba of the Congo. And speaking of Allende of Chile, he was replaced by the terribly brutal dictator, General Pinochet, who was a great defender of Operation Condor and also oversaw the murder of tens of thousands of his people, and was praised by Secretary of State Henry Kissinger as a great defender of capitalism. I believe in national security, and I don't believe that U.S. security is served. I believe it's jeopardized when our agencies overthrow or assassinate the leaders of other countries because they don't follow our policies. I'm a capitalist. I think that capitalism has given us incredible technology, art, science, medicine. I think it holds out the hope for the future. But there's this new form of capitalism that I call predatory capitalism that's the enemy of true capitalism. Let me explain. When I was in business school, I was taught that a good CEO makes a decent rate of return for his company and also makes sure his company is a good citizen. He pays his workers a fair wage, gives them health insurance and retirement pensions, pays taxes, imagine that, and supports local school and recreational facilities and so on and so forth. In essence, he makes sure that his company serves the public interest. That all changed in 1976 when Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize in economics and stated, amongst many other things, the only responsibility of business is to maximize profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. It changed everything. And it has created this global fiasco, what I believe we're headed toward this disaster where we're in it a lot now with the climate change, with all the things that we all know is happening, and we must change that. And we can change that. How? I think the American Revolution actually offers an interesting example. Back in 1773, most everybody in the United States believed that the British were invincible. But George Washington stepped forward, and he remembered 20 years earlier during the French and Indian War, he had witnessed at the Battle of the Monongahela the defeat of a huge, powerful British army by a handful of Indians. And Washington said, they're not invincible. All we got to do is hide behind trees. Change the rules. So I think that's where we're at today. Change the rules. I like the rules I learned in business school, that a good corporation, a good CEO should make sure that his corporation serves the public interest, is a good citizen. I like the idea that you and I should invest in corporations that, instead of essentially destroying the resources upon which our economy is based, instead of doing that, they clean up pollution, regenerate destroyed environments, develop new technologies for more efficient energy, transportation, communications, and just about everything else. In essence, let's get our corporations to create an economic system that is itself a renewable resource. Are you ready to do that? Yes, I think we're all ready. We can create this renewable resource. So our corporations today really run the world. They control most of the politics in this country and just about everywhere else. But it's important to remember that they need us. We work for them, we manage them, many of you own them, you run them. They depend on us to buy their goods and services, to invest in them, to work for them, to support them through our tax dollars. We have the power. You have the power. Earlier, we heard this incredible music about our passion and our power. Let's put our passion to work. This brings us to you. What is it you can do, each and every one of you? What can we all do? Well, I think perhaps the most important thing to start off by saying is that we are living at a time in history when the individual, you, has more power than ever before. I travel a great deal around the world, speaking at events like this and many others. And everywhere I go, whether it's in Asia or Africa, South America, Europe, Middle East, the United States, people are waking up to the fact that we live on a very tiny, fragile space station with no shuttles. And it's headed for disaster, and we got to turn it around. We can do it. So in my latest book, which is for sale out here, The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, I have a whole section devoted to what you can do, lists and ideas. But I want to just mention 3 of them here today, kind of in summary. So remembering that we have this power today, especially with the internet. Number 1, search out and spread, shine a light on the story behind the story. I think my life as an economic hitman highlights the fact that there's almost always a story behind the story. And recently, revelations such as WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden papers and the Panama Papers and reporting by amazing bloggers and others, the Pulitzer Prize-winning ProPublica, Common Dreams, many, many organizations out there are shining a light on the fact that we have corrupt politicians. We have tax-evading billionaires. You know, democracy depends upon transparency. It depends on understanding the story behind the story. It demands that you and I look for the story. It demands that we question our leaders and our government policies. That's the patriotic thing to do. So number 1, look for, spread the story behind the story. Number 2, use local, individual, and community power, your power, to change politics, to change the governmental system, to change the laws. We, the people, must do it. We can't wait for a president to do it, whoever the next president is. We have to do it, and that's our job in a democracy, to do that. Recently, the small state of Vermont, with less than 0.2% of the US population, a tiny group of people in that small state, got laws passed that forced corporations to label GMOs. As a result, 5 of the major food companies, ConAgra, General Mills, Kellogg's, Campbell Soup, Mars, all committed to labeling GMOs here in Michigan and everywhere else in the United States. And I just recently heard Hugh Grant, not the actor, but the CEO of Monsanto, on the radio saying that that's impacting him hugely. Monsanto's going to have to reevaluate its attitude to GMOs because of what happened in the state of Vermont. We, the people, have forced the corporations to end apartheid in South Africa, to clean up polluted rivers, pass laws to make that happen, to open their doors wider to women and minorities. We have the power, the movement to amend now, to get big money out of politics. That's very important. So, number 2, join an organization or start one that impacts local laws, national laws, global laws. Do it. Get involved, please. This is something important that we all can do. And number 3, help a corporation understand that it must serve a public interest. Corporations listen to you. CEOs, I know lots of CEOs of very powerful corporations. They know if they're getting flooded by emails, tweets, or Facebook, whatever. They know. and they have to respond. So I suggest to you, pick a corporation, any corporation that appeals to you. Send them an email. Don't make them the enemy. Say, I love you, I love your product, but I'm not going to buy it anymore until you stop polluting, or clean up pollution, or pay your workers a fair wage, or whatever your issue is. Send that email to the corporation and to all your social networking circles, and ask them to send it to all their social networking circles. Get involved. So, shine a light, change the laws, and convince corporations to serve a public interest. And in that way, we're going to turn this economic system that is failing us, one that's exhausted, one that's devastating its own resource base, into a renewable resource. I think you and I live at the most amazing, important time in human history. We are going through a revolution, a consciousness revolution. People are waking up across the planet. Together, we're going to come together, and we're going to create a world that my 8-year-old grandson and every other child of every sentient being on this planet is going to look back at and say, hey, thank God for TEDx in Michigan. Thank God all those people came together and committed.
And you know, said ye or chame bese and ye masumwa. Nana wasumwa. Ena abrofona ankasa broni na ankasa ankasa begyina ho no mu a ono ankasa ekene no mu asem no e de akire no. Na se mitie ensem a broni kan ya eniema kakra mesu free mu no. Ebi ni se obeso kire se was start his idea no so. Ena ohwe ne motive nso so the start his idea no so so. Na a friend say every young man be a dream say obenya sika na your friend say when to me because obi them say money is power. And the ono as a young man a junior na e woni trim eno no enti obaby enti Ghana for ma na make jam some na money na because I perform man no omo nai omo na sa obaby ena e kire na de so what you say and oba na promise and say or design money nyina be there ebe ma no na ni nyina no questions wo ni nyina mu gire say adia oyeye no sesi ya no when and air charge no was an na oyeye no if you say no nim say adwuma na oyeye na enye a che say utia enkro bebe wo hono mu a wa kokko nkro no so a obobo ni nyina din nkro akoso che say ono no wa ko set up ama nipa bi ewuo ama ye friend say aman eho ekire wo mo so te ase ama ehon kire wo mo no ni because all started adwuma no mo kan say ekuo bi ebedi o machi e friend say ye friend say ko ne friend mo Jaco ebedi na chi nti doesn't matter say okọ Ghana for example na wakọ ye sa ne dwumadi no e wo Ghana na okọ Ghana no ono okọ no mfetu nko but nipa na oni ne kwakodi nkomo no ono no onim say Jaco eta na chi a che say etutu sembia ba Jaco beba into mo no che say gangster way o set bibia no mo ba ana mo ba ababe ye de ompeso mo ye ni nti wo no o Ghana ba na say hwan ba no uni say and na me kan say bi say nti ye musa ye government ni say bibisa e da omo so ana bibisa e da omo so say abrofini bi eni o maba abedi sa nkomo ni bia na say ye fe ne say ya bo besia na say ena fa besia ne ye nya sa say ni say be you say na say ni say ebi aba sa da na say because on tia say ye leaders ni nyina etutu kwan na oni de we friends abrochire amemum esitie na omo Ghana omo ba Ghana na say do musi amanzo a omo ntimi enye sa na yemi bi ewo amemu nim sometimes enti eno ena ma ye gina so sisi e buza sa question ne say sa ade ne ebi da mo so ana broni bi aba na za America bi edi bibi abe chance bi abe to mo so ana na hu because enema mo ye ne de ye ntiase enti sa enema ekoso ewo ewiase mu a yenwia enipa na sanye ne netie no a opeso odi ezo ne tumi nti obeso ose ewiase bibia no nko anya bibia akwese nipa bi wo no mo a ono no obeso no nko anya na obi aba ne nchen na obi aba yes sir yes sir yes sir you nipa bi wo sa enti sana abrofo no kro no aye say on be say omo yes sir yes sir yes sir yes sir no mudi wiase nso nti omo fa ho enema omo be because enipa ewu ho pa because we enipa da sene na wo ye be ma na me be ma na ye nyina atena sese ye ka asem se me kroni uzu kroni ne nyina ye negotiate enema bi negotiate enema na o ka kire me se your friend is saying ye wo no pese me ye ne wo se me ye se ma anya de wo pese me ye ne de a ene sei ena abe me na woka ya no na matiada efise niema na abe me no se me dwene ho consequences ne niema na ebeba me so no a me fi se enwete enti ne se skabata ho de niema menyi ska na menko so what I say nipa esu nipa bi esuro omo honam nipa bi suro se omo fi se omo wu yi anase nipa bi suro so mbeti agina entina omo de sa sanction never to omo so ajakofo na ne ho ahwan de sanction fo beto omo so na so omo ba be ye wrong deal bia na omo age wrong deal na e afa because omo suro se bibi be de ebesi na eyampa so bibi esi se na broni no all can no chese eyade a omo ye any Iraq war ne Arabian war ne ne mane mo ko ne nyina na ebia ye ba ne be ka chose ye say na so wan nye de se ye de a enye say ne be yo saa ne omo di wiase so ntina me ka say enua panyin no a ye nam na mamo so no ye nhwe ne yie ne ye nhwe ne yie na ye musa ye leaders ne say saa ne ma no ebi eda omo so na because ye ntiase na abrofo no so ye nhwe omo so ye because enyom nyina na enye but ma men kan some nchero se komo de enipa bi a onfa ho se de obeba befa e de feed the family nti broni no onfa ho se de obeba befa e de feed the family nti it's up to you se onso obebo wo ho ban na wa protect eniema na wo se de be ya obi anzo emma nti ze no ye se de mo adie no mo ni nye den enko na de aka no na ye mo ho ban na ye fense ye nwa no mo deli ye nhwe mo ye ye leaders ye mu some questions pa say bibi sa ho no mu na omo loan ni omo niema na omo ye nyina na enka ye nye na nka ye nhwem omo niema na maji nyina na nka ye nye na nka ye nhwem in such a way say ye ntimi nkoji nhwe omo nze mu za ba na meka ne say na niema ntimi nye transparent emfanye den emfama say bi ne damo so sa na ate ase na afi ye hu say okay fine enyemo fault entina ma oman na tesa because me hu di entia e wo so oman ya bibia ho so no etimi edikasa so ate ase etimi dika sa edi nkrofo ka esa entina ese bibi eta to entu ma hu na enyi na nka mo na enyi na enkokoro ba ko na enyi na because me nim pefe se oman bi ho no mo a omo ti gina se sa nkrofo we de onu bebe bia no omo famra e ma yekun bi mo enti yen aba mo no me ka Africa o omo ni za nyeme ni nyina anti se an economic hitman ne ba na ode ne mra ne ne ma ne ba na omaje atuma na so omaje amene na chese no ano no enti abusuafo eye Kwame Yeboah na motiminka ene enwumre na Ashan Brokers nso ena maso eguzo a motie na kakra ye the news ene niema ekoso se ye de bebre mo se de be ya ye nyina ye ni ebetimi ade adaho eyi na ankoye se mese se koye se mese dia na se miama sem ena mede ba but ekoye se ade ni nie no kra ni nie na eno de wa ankaso wa anye no kra ni na wonfa ho na se mse wo de o man be yi no a efri amanfo edwumadie no na se wo de mse wo de wa yi ho ade efrim onka ho enti Ghana man Ghana eye nyina dia Ghana eye efenisen ekura yakopon ehya ne pa ye nyina yenim because you know say Ghana de nyamia no but ye ni pa no so yesu ene be me wo nyamia de ehya ye ni yenwie dili a yente nyina say epense mema ye no mun dili fairly people ni ebi infact ebi nsutu wo na ebi nsutu e na enkoye say de bia no ebi nsutu abrofo na nko a ye nti nyina sa if you say mema e ofie na enu kwa say ye mema transna mema ayi enti leaders ye pesi hu say abrɔfo sanctions no ebi da mo so ana because anya saa deɛ ɛne nneɛma a yɛhu wɔ Ghana no yɛn deɛ yɛhu ne yie kyerɛ sɛ yɛfiri sɛ sika ɛwɔ ɔman anim nneɛma bebree wɔ ɔman anim a amanfoɔ bebree yɛ dɛ ɛpɛ a ebɛtumi atɔn ɛde ama wɔn mo meka sɛ mbɔ din a bebree wo dem fans men starting free the common gold any oils ne ho a ɛwɔ hɔ ne cocoa ne ho a no kra no dem starting free ne nneɛma nkasa free hɔ no ma ebɛtumi atɔn no yɛ tɔn a ɛne yɛ tɔn ne yie a nke betumi atɔn agye the right price na yɛn so yɛtumi ɛde abu yɛ ma yie anaasɛ sɛ yɛkɔgye besia bi kora no a yɛbɛtena sɛ ne ahwɛ mu yie ne ɛna ɔma tena sɛ aka kyerɛ sɛ masa wopɛ sɛ wode tuo bra wobɛsɛ meyɛ nso yɛmfa tuo mmra na yɛn nso yɛne mu mfa nhyia because we are bɛrima na obi ba na obebu fa so deɛ masa nhyɛ da nyɛ easy saa nti Africa man yɛme yɛne nna hɔ menkase yɛnkɔ ne yɛnkɔko so ɔte asɛ sometimes ntokwa bi koraa wɔ hɔnom no koraa no a ɛnyɛ gidigidi but psychologically and intellectually and standing firm into certain things, can actually go a long way. And you know, more subscribe to your YouTube channel, no, na mobile information you say ediete abribia if I'm Kwame Yeboah. Na ebibi man ebi I mean ensure obi bibia.